Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of Death by Adaptation, Clapper's new book club series. This is an ongoing project that we're just starting. It's a monthly podcast that will be accompanied by 2 reviews written every month, probably just by me and the good Ewan Gleadow. I'm your host, Nicolò Grasso, and to kickstart this wonderful project, we decided to make this special first episode on Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And before we dive into this, I want to welcome the panel of today. So we have the lovely Ewan Gleadow. How are you doing, Ewan?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm full of cocktails, so I'm good. I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
And we have the host of the Uncut Gems podcast and the feature editor himself, Jakub Flasz. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. What we'll be doing with this podcast every month is discussing not only the book, but also the film adaptations of these novels. And this first episode is quite interesting because some people would say, is the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood book an adaptation of the film, or is the film an adaptation of the book? And the history behind it is quite interesting, a bit vague in some parts, but to make it very short, Quentin Tarantino was grabbing all the different stories that he could from Hollywood veterans that he worked with, like Robert Forster, Burt Reynolds, David Carradine, Kurt Russell. And he thought, you know what, this would be an interesting book to write about jolly good Hollywood in the 60s when the times were changing. And he thought about the story of a stuntman and the actor that is portraying, just doing shit in Hollywood. And so he started writing this book. Apparently, he had been working on it for a few years, actually, before he realized, you know what? This would make for a good movie rather than just a good book. And so he stopped writing the novel, got into writing the screenplay, made the movie in 2019, produced by Sony, his first non-Weinstein production, got to Cannes, got to the Oscars, everyone watched the movie. And now, 2 years later, here we are with the finished novel in our hands. A novel which is an interesting beast, especially because it's the first time Tarantino has written something that isn't a screenplay. And that's actually the first question I want to ask you guys. What do you think of Tarantino as a novelist compared to Tarantino as a screenwriter? Ewan, why don't you go first?
I think inevitably, if you're gonna, like you said, it's so difficult to figure out if he's adapting his own work, really, and which way that goes. Is it him adapting his book to the screen, or is it him adapting the screen to his book? Either way, it's the fine line between screenwriter and author is that screenwriters have the benefit of visualizing their project. They have the ability to showcase actors and actions and scenes. They have that showcase. Where with novels, you have to fill in those details. You can't just say, oh, Leonardo DiCaprio walked in, he looks like this. You gotta fill those details in. And I think Tarantino does that well. I think his screenwriting influences and his experience definitely lingers on the book. However, I don't think that's the biggest draw of the book, and I do think it has its own limitations. I'm sure we'll get into those later, but on a whole, I think it's a reliable structure for Tarantino to make. I just don't know how well it really translates to the written word. It seems like a guy that is trying very desperately to get away from that screenwriting label, and he kind of pulls away from it quite well at times, and other times it feels very strict, and it feels like this is essentially just a breakdown of a scene or a part we've seen in the film that really has no variation apart from setting. And that's fine. We've got to make those concessions because we need to make sure that these characters and the screenplay is that we know of it, that we know of these characters, because the real benefit of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is that the people reading it, the bulk of them have seen the movie, and then they're interested to see where these characters go. So really, you're going into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood thinking, I want to know where Rick Dalton's going, I want to know where Cliff Booth is going, Charles Manson, Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate. You want to know where those people end up. And I enjoyed my time with the book. I just thought it was a bit underwhelming. And I think a lot of that does have to do with that point you raised there. It's the difference between screenwriter and author. And I think Tarantino tries to blur it a little too much at times.
To me, the question of whether he's, I don't know, whether I like him as a screenwriter or as a novelist, I don't want to say it's a loaded one, but it's an interesting one. Because if I remember correctly, before he writes his actual screenplay, he writes a treatment. So like I think The Hateful Eight was written, like a good chunk of it was written as a novel. Some of his older screenplays were originated as a written story. So it's kind of, and if you watch it, especially earlier films, like the films like Pulp Fiction or like Reservoir Dogs, they're structured like novels, and even like The Hateful Eight structured like a novel. So like he always makes sure to use chapters and to jump between timelines the way like authors have the liberty to do. So he's almost a filmmaker and novelist kind of wrapped into one, to me. And then therefore, like reading the actual his first novel that actually just made it to market, it kind of feels like you're not really reading something written by a debutante. Like it's something that's written by someone who's done this before. And then, well, yes, he's not he's not David Foster Wallace. Let's be clear here. Like he's not Thomas Pynchon. Like he's not, he's or like Cormac McCarthy. Like he's not. But he writes in a very compelling way in terms of writing prose, and I think he does this well. Like when you mentioned this as well, when you say there's detail that you need to fill in that in a screenplay that is just a visual, but then I think you can distinguish a good writer from a mediocre writer by the way they kind of just fill in that detail. A mediocre writer will just describe shit to you. A good writer will choose these hooks, these little wrinkles, to help you paint the picture with your own imagination, and he does that. He's a very, I think he has talent for that, and then, which makes his only book, I think, very easy to read. Like I'll have to put it that way. So yeah, and so to me, the question of how I see him as a novelist is basically it's almost like a natural progression from his filmmaking sort of output, and I think they're both kind of wrapped into this one burrito of just artistic expression that he's just, I don't know, that's just how he operates. He's both he's a writer and a screenwriter, kind of just all in one, and it's just one and the same. It's just two sides of the same coin in the same sort of spirit. So it's not like he had to adapt his craft to do this, because I have a feeling that that's just how he's operated, and he just made a commitment not to turn something into a screenplay, put it this way.
Yeah, that's it for me. That's what made this such an easy breezy read, because his style of dialogue is intact in this one. But not only that, I think for him, writing this novel gave him a lot of freedom, and a lot of freedom to do things that he would never have gotten away in the movie, especially the self-indulgence. He's already an incredibly self-indulgent director, but here he goes wild. And one of the things, like early on in the novel, you have the first chapter that is the encounter between Rick Dalton and the talent agent Marvin Schwartz, and it's long. It's like 40 pages long, but it's so fun. Like I was loving reading all the back and forth between them and getting into the mind of the character. And we'll be talking about that in a bit, but there's a lot of deep diving into the psychology of these characters, into what they're thinking, things that you can maybe see in the movie, maybe not, but actually getting a glimpse of what they're actually thinking about certain people, about what they're doing. It adds an extra layer to all of them. But second chapter of the novel is just talking about Cliff Booth and these cinephile tendencies, and it goes on for 40 pages, and I was laughing my ass off. He's talking about I'm Curious Yellow. He's talking about his Kurosawa love just for cinema in general, and the classic westerns and Italian cinema when he was in the war, and it just keeps going on and on. And I think it's important to have the chapter early on, because it says, okay, if you don't like Tarantino and you got into the second chapter and you're hating it, drop the book, because it's not going to get any better. If anything, it's going to get even more self-indulgent. And as someone who loves Tarantino, I had a blast. There's an element of fun that is palpable in here. and the fact that he has no limitations to his creativity, to what he can write about, to how long he can write about certain things. It's liberating. And I honestly hope, we all hope he maybe will continue making movies. But if he stopped and just wrote novels, I'd be down for that. Because I think his style, like all of you said, just perfectly translates to the written form. Even if, again, a bit self-indulgent at times. And something that I want to ask you is that there's changing styles in this one. You go from certain sections that are elongated flashbacks, others that are dialogue-heavy scenes, and a few, and that's an interesting comparison to get into the differences between the novel and the film. In the film, when they're shooting the Lancer pilot, you actually are watching it as if you were watching the pilot, not the making of the pilot. It's like you're watching a proper Western show. Meanwhile, in the book, it's like you're reading a Western novel from the 50s and 60s. How did you guys find these differences between the changing styles and the flashbacks on various characters and these Western sections? Because personally, if I had to complain about something, criticize something of this book, is that probably those were the weakest parts, the Western parts for me, because it gets so bogged down in the nitty gritty of, the Lancer family and the father. And it builds this lovely picture, but it's very self-contained and doesn't necessarily add much to the overarching, outside of atmosphere, outside of, again, getting to know the characters. It's kind of like an extended version of the film in a way. Those were the only parts where I kind of felt the weight of the writing. I don't know how you guys feel.
I mean, I totally agree with you on this. In the book, there's a chapter that's towards the end where they just describe the lore of the Lancer series, and I was just like, oh, can we please? I mean, it's basically just, I know this is there's like 2 or 3 of them where they just talk about you just go into the stories of what they're filming, I suppose. Like you can see that this is Tarantino just like thinking about, if I made Bounty Law or Lancer, this would be my process. I would just write the backstory of everything, and it's just, that's great on its own. But there is a better story in there, and we just paused it. I mean, Quentin, I love you, man, but Jesus, unimportant. Whereas in the film, there's a scene in there where that's played for a reason that way. Like, you just wake up in the film where they get into the saloon, they start talking, but it's played for comedic effect because it's not for comedic effect, but it's played for you to realize the thin boundary between film and real life, because then DiCaprio would just talk about bring her fiddle and her bow, and he would just pause and he says, line, what's my line, right? And it would just like go again, and then you'll hear Sam Wanamaker, the director, going like, sexy evil Hamlet, like, it's just so. It just breaks the fourth wall, as in like breaks the illusion momentarily, and then just comes back into the illusion, and then it just whisks you out again, and that's fun. And it's also funny because these moments are kind of genuinely comedic. In here, it's basically like, I like Westerns, and this is the last Western I like, and it's kind of like, meanwhile, it's basically in the middle of a story where Cliff Booth is going to go and go into the Span Ranch. And it's just, I want to be there. I want to be on his shoulder. And then just like, you're denying me this. Like, this is not good for business. Jesus, Quentin, just chill. Yeah.
I think it's what we've all mentioned vaguely. It's Tarantino is so established as a screenwriter that now that he wants to make the leap to author, he doesn't really have to think about the consequences of what would happen if a book didn't sell well. He has made his money and he's just doing this for fun, which is very liberating to see. It's very nice to see an author that can just write whatever he wishes because he doesn't really need the cultural appreciation of the book. He's already had that with the film, and he's writing this as just an extension to a topic and a thought process that he enjoyed visiting, which is good. It has good intentions, and it is strong in places. What my issue is as Nicolò mentioned, the sort of preservation of Tarantino. You know, he directed an Oscar-winning remake of Lady in Red, which was it Lady in Red or was it Lady in Satin?
It's the Lady in Red with Michael Madsen.
With Michael Madsen.
No, but that's a tongue in cheek. He's self-aware. Like
it is
massive tongue in cheek.
So you know, it's fun.
It is fun. I just there are times in this book, and I think most of it comes from it's such a very specific thing to think of, but it's what stuck with me the most. He uses italics to present the thoughts of his characters, and I have nothing wrong with that.
Plenty of people do that.
Plenty of people do that. Yes, I wonder about the impact of it here, because it's usually just Rick Dalton or Cliff Booth thinking, "Oh well, I don't like this person." Yeah, it's everyone, but more so with Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth. It's whenever they're using it, it's sort of I don't like what they said about me. Do you think I've done Shakespeare? I remember that line. It was, "Do you think I've done fucking Shakespeare?" Which is a good line, but
I get it. No, but I know. I think I know where you're going. It's just like, well, it's inconsistent. Usually, you'll have like this will be part of the deal with. Okay, that means the narrator is one of the characters, as in like we're in Rick Dalton's head, and that's whose thoughts we're hearing, right? But then he's doing it for everyone. But that means it's just telling you a story.
Yeah. Okay, I understand that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because
I honestly read this in Quentin Tarantino's voice.
Yes. Yeah. I could not help myself but hear his voice. Like from the very first page, it's very telling that it is a Quentin Tarantino piece. As like Nicolò said, you've got 2 chapters to sort out if you like this or not. Because I think it is self-indulgent, but it is, like you said, it is a tongue-in-cheek style, and it's just seeing how far you can push it. And you just push it for a couple of times. But I think the bulk of it is the people that are reading this are Tarantino fans. People are not going to go into this book thinking, well, I've not heard of this Quentin fellow, but I would like to give his work a go. You're not going to start here. Probably going to end here, if anything, because he's best known for his film work. And I think comparatively to the film, I do think the film is stronger by a long shot. But I think that's more down to the notes he wishes to pick up on in the novel are the same to the film, more or less. But it's how he adapts them in the film. Or you've got Kurt Russell doing narration, or you've got Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton at the meeting with Marvin Schwartz.
You don't get Zoe Bell telling Brad Pitt to get fucked.
What the fuck did you do to my car?
I think there's...
Get off your wardrobe, off my set, get fucked.
I think as well, it's
Rick fucking Dalton. I just watched it last night again, sorry.
That's all right. I'll watch it.
We didn't establish how clean this show is. It's not very clean now, is it?
No. You can't be. We're reviewing a Quentin Tarantino book. However,
if anything, it's stained.
This was stained before it began. But yeah, I was thinking the scenes in the film where it's I've lost my train of thought now. What was it? It was so I think one of the big points that I'm going off of with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as a book and as a film, the big difference for me is how he adapts the culture and the surrounding actors and the music and the style of the 60s. In the film, he has the benefit of utilizing audio, essentially. He can have those record scratch moments where Mrs. Robinson plays, or he has references to Bob Dylan. In the book, it's
Bring
just...
a little lovin', dude.
Precise. That is a phenomenal song. I had that in my playlist for years.
Do you know, I kind of... I know this is cliche. Today, on the way back to and from work, guess what I was listening to?
That song.
Just fucking the entire soundtrack. I mean, it's just such a beautiful music to drive to. My goodness.
Yeah. And the commercials as well, so it makes it like a real radio.
Yeah,
that was it actually.
Immersive.
Yeah, not to spin off from my own point there. But have you all got copies of the book?
Yeah.
Right at the back with the commercials. I thought that was a lovely touch. Yeah. I thought that was really nice. It adds nothing to his writing, but it adds more to the context of how the novel should be perceived.
Yes, it's. Do you know what this is? These are. Trailers for Machete in front of Grindhouse.
Yes, it is. It is exactly that.
Which is basically like, okay, I'm not reading a book. I'm reading an experience. Because this is he doesn't want you to just have a book. Oh yeah, let's read what
precisely.
No,
yes.
This is a type of book that was popular at a certain time in the past that no longer is around, and he's bringing it back.
And it speaks to that in not just what he's written, but how he's presented the book itself.
Mhm.
He's got a very like.
It's
Obviously,
not a
they can't see
hardcover, by the way, and he was
It's not a hardcover, it's a paperback.
he thought with the editor apparently, because they wanted, now we want a hardcover, and Quentin was like, get fucked. I want
Apparently,
it.
Aren't they
I want
actually
a
doing
paperback.
that though?
I believe so, but in the distant future.
Yeah, no, it says. Hold on.
The one at the end, yeah.
Coming to a bookstore near you.
Yeah, the deluxe
New
hardcover edition.
material,
Yeah.
including never
But usually
before seen
hardcover
photos.
comes first. Paperback is basically like, oh, that's the cheapo version. Once the editor made some of their money back.
But I think the actual look of the book, with the pictures on the front, and it's quite a small book. Like, I could fit this in my pocket.
It's great for an airport.
I could fit that in my pocket.
That's an airport page turner. That's
This is
pretty
an
much how it
airport page turner in the same vein of what Tarantino loves most about this era. It is that sort of pulpy little paperback you pick up at an airport and you can read on your way to work or anything.
That's the type of book that Rick Dalton has folded in half in his pocket
Precisely.
when he's reading it on set, when he's not rehearsing his lines, when he's waiting for his shot, right?
Yeah, and I think the actual style and presentation of his work does more to lend the context of the book and the novel as a whole. I think actually presenting it as what he thinks of it as a time capsule for the 1960s, just the aesthetics of it, and it's actually quite a nice. It's nice to feel that, because you think, yes, this could actually fit in the period he wishes to pay homage to, and it's a very nice touch.
Yeah. I would love, honestly, to meet someone who hasn't watched the movie and reads this book, and I would love to hear their thoughts, because it's really hard to separate like the look of the film, the actors that play these characters.
Yeah,
that's the hardest part, and the hardest actually to get into something a bit darker now, let's say. There's a lot of dark things to discuss actually in this book, but just talking about like the psychology and the history of the characters, there's a lot of backstory that's revealed, and one of the characters that gets the most backstory is Cliff Booth. And something that I was defending originally with the movie was that there's a flashback about, did he actually kill his wife or not? And which for me, honestly, I think it's in the beginning of the book, and I hated I didn't write down the quote, but there's something about like following characters who are unlikable and doesn't really matter, something like that. I can see a lot of the more politically correct crowd, which they kind of already did actually, just getting to these parts of the book and going like, you see, he's a horrible person. Cliff Booth actually killed his wife, just cut her in half and stayed with her where she was bleeding, regretting his choice. And it's the level of extra detail that originally I was like, oh no, we didn't need this. But in a way, it even adds more depth to Cliff Booth. And not just that, but just in general, this book is horny as fuck. Like, this might be the most sexual Tarantino has ever been.
Did you read it with a boner?
Have you not seen From Dusk Till Dawn where he drinks tequila off of someone's foot?
That's honestly, that's
Salma Hayek.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's been it could have been Harvey Keitel for all I knew.
I'm sorry.
That's an interesting alternate. I'd love to see the Keitel
If Salma Hayek allowed me to drink anything out of anything, I'll be like, yes, ma'am.
Just opening up the mouth wherever you want.
Yeah, right in there.
But that's something I was thinking, actually. I was going through Tarantino's filmography and thinking, has he ever had proper sex scenes? I was thinking, okay, you have like Jackie Brown, the quick joke between like Fonda and the De Niro. It's like, okay, that's kind of it.
He's never really had nudity.
As well, yes. That's true. And which makes this book fascinating, because...
But this doesn't have nudity either, or like sex scenes. It's just anecdotal, because this is basically just men talking about women they banged.
Yes, and Cliff Booth getting lost in his like sexual history and things like that. Like, I went home and got blown by a woman, even though I didn't.
Yeah, but they never go into like, and then they entered the room and he just pulled off. No, there's one scene in the car when he picks up the hippie. There it gets closest because
where she gets
and then she teases him. But that gets the closest to what would be sort of like a sex scene, but but he turns it around into a comedic scene, right?
Yeah, and I think the point of those scenes where they are essentially it's just sexual bragging for the characters is it's just to highlight that hypermasculinity of the 1960s, where you've got people like Steve McQueen and
Lee Marvin, Charlie Bronson, all these guys that
you've got those
drops every half a second.
Hyper-masculine characters who would go to parties and say, "Oh, I've had sex with all of these women. It's like, that's good for you, Steve McQueen. How was the Great Escape? Stuff like that. But it's not used as sort of it's used for the characters to brag. For Tarantino, it's an allusion to the idea that these are just very fractured, worried men that they'll soon be found out as just regular people rather than sex-crazed star symbols.
Well, they're both, right? But
Precisely,
then,
yeah.
But then there's with the Cliff Booth, because we kind of we're drifting already. But then I wanted to kind of quickly just touch on this. When the film came out, and then even now when we were talking about other things on different podcasts, and then some people will be like, the Cliff Booth is a misogynist, therefore Tarantino is a misogynist. No, he's an author. He just writes a character. Like you can write a character who's an asshole, and that doesn't mean you're an asshole. You don't have to identify with all of your characters. You probably will identify with some or some of their traits, but doesn't tell. But when people kind of latch onto this because Tarantino is cool to hate these days. He used to be cool to like in the 90s. Now he's cool to hate, and just.
It's been surrounded by controversy and is not stopping. And we'll be getting into that later on because there's a few controversies.
Like I wrote a piece on this already on my own website, basically about how it's easy to hate on him because he doesn't really think like he has anything to hide as well as a person. He'll be like, oh, yeah, I had a relationship with Harvey Weinstein. I don't know. That's what happened because like I don't have much to hide. Like Ben Affleck probably does, but But it's just like, I can talk about this, and people are like, he talks about it, he's evil.
He never hides behind excuses, which is admirable.
Yeah,
because I was always trying to even with the unfortunate Uma Thurman accident that a lot of people keep bringing up, it's something that they already kind of sorted back then, and then Uma Thurman made it resurface, and they settled it once again in an amicable way. But it's nice to have the history of demonizing him as a director, and they put her in harm's way. Yes, this happened, but it's. Again, people want black and white, and Tarantino gives you life. He gives you gray, and he does the same thing with his characters. They're all horrible people, but also people who want to be good, and that's life. That's just how it is sometimes.
People would say, why would I follow a character like Cliff Booth, even like in the book? And it's like he's a war hero. He's a killer. He's someone who knows what it feels like to stab someone and look at the light in their eyes just going dim. He knows what it feels like to take someone's life. He knows what so for all intents and purposes he kind of passes off as a monster, right? It does just his existence is half the time is like the Hulk, like he's trying to stay calm, right? So he doesn't do anything stupid. But then it's like people latch on to these things, and then they'll just say, "Oh yeah, well that like why should I follow a character like this?" Like people just buy toys with Darth Vader on it, and it's fine. Like it's just a character. Grow up.
Yeah, I think inherent to writing is that every character there is a semblance of the author in it, but that does not mean that the author is a part and part replicant of that character. If Stephen King were a replicant of all the characters he wrote, we should be very concerned for the man.
Ouch.
But people used to accuse him of that.
They did
back in the day when it's like, because but he was the author who kept putting these fucked up dreams into kids' heads because he was. I should know because I picked up first. I read Salem's Lot when I was 11, so yeah, I didn't get much sleep after that, but. But it's like people like to like he would go on like Joe Rogan podcast or like what's his face
Mark Maron,
and he will say or something he will put something to the effect of back in the day or like even before like 2019 Sharon Tate would have like if you mentioned Sharon Tate people would think about the way she died. That's all people would be thinking. Like 99% of people would just think who recognized the name would be thinking about the Tate LaBianca murders. That's it. Some people would be thinking of like, Valley of the Dolls because they're just film nerds. But then most people probably wouldn't even know that she starred in anything. They would know she's an actress. She was married to Roman Polanski, and then she died in a horrible way together with like a bunch of her friends.
And then, since we got actually on the topic of Sharon Tate, I'm curious to hear both of your history, as weird as it might sound, with Sharon Tate? Like, how
she's
did you
dead, I
came
don't know.
to?
So
Well, yeah, well,
history with her.
well, how did you first come to, I don't know about her story, and had you watched other movies prior to watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with her? Has the movie actually changed you in some way? Changed the portrayal of Sharon Tate? How do you guys feel?
You know what? My first experience of Sharon, like I knew what had happened, like I'd read of it, but I watched that awful The Killing of Sharon Tate movie, the Haunting of Sharon Tate, which is from Daniel Farrens. It's awful. It's real like B-movie schlock taking a poke at the real world, and it's awful. It's horrible stuff. But it's if more people had seen that, they probably wouldn't have an issue with what Tarantino does. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with what he does. It's just that it has that real world connection. So inevitably, it is going to have some level of controversy to it. However, it's back to that point of where do writers get their ideas from and how much of a reflection are these characters of Tarantino. Tarantino writes from a place of genuine love for the genre and genuine love for the decade of film he's adapting into his novel. I don't think he's writing with malice or any ill intent towards Sharon Tate or anybody in the book, but he obviously has to, wary on the side of caution. I think he does a little bit. You have to remember that this is just the projection of what he thinks, and also by and large what his characters think, because eventually and inevitably the character is going to dictate where the story goes. And if that story is going down to taking pokes at Bruce Lee and Steve McQueen, so be it. That is what his characters have done. He's not going to stop that approach, because why would he? It was rather entertaining, and for me personally, it does no harm. I don't see Bruce Lee as any more or less of a person than I do. It's just a fictitious adaptation of a man. It's like Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm. We don't think any more or less of him. We don't actually think he acts and responds this way. We don't think the same of Bruce Lee. We don't think the same of Steve McQueen. We certainly don't think the same of Sharon Tate.
But he's not entirely fictitious. At least Bruce Lee isn't. Like, just to quickly just put a wrinkle on this, because it's based on these stories that these people he was told, right? That he hated stuntmen, and then these are So, but then with Sharon Tate, it's an interesting one, because I think, honest to God, I would probably say I may have seen maybe one film with her, and that would be Fearless Vampire Killers when I was very, very young, and that's probably it. And for me, she was more. She well, up until relatively recently, because then I had a I don't know, period of my life when I was interested in called serial killers. Like, it's just historically speaking, just like reading about like Ted Bundy and things like that. It was just this morbid curiosity. Is just, I don't know. I don't have to explain myself. I just like reading about all sorts of stuff, and that's one of them. So
very, very normal reading about serial killers. Yes.
Yeah, so
no need to explain yourself until they slap the cuffs on you and ask where you were on this certain particular night.
That's it. Leave
no proof.
It's like no, but then like Sharon Tate was basically then to me synonymous with how she died, and then I have to say that and then I think before I watched the film, I also listened to I don't know if you guys listen to it, but if not, shameless sort of recommendation, you should listen to a podcast called You Must Remember This. I don't know if you've heard of this. I think it's like one of the most popular podcasts like in the world. That's hosted and produced by this woman who's called her name is Karina Longworth. And then back in 2015-16, she had a 10-part series about the Manson murders, and basically just like the portrayal of 60s Hollywood, and then Charles Manson's plays in it, in this whole and his family, and the murder of Sharon Tate, and what it meant for the culture at large. It's brilliant. It's an absolutely amazing piece of podcasting. It's like 10 hours of listening. It's great. But I came to realize, and this is something that the book does differently to the film, is the film is about Sharon Tate, whereas the book isn't. As in, Sharon Tate is a symbol. As in, okay, well, you'll have to bear with me on this. I'm sorry, I'm hijacking this. This may take a while, because I have stuff to say, and then I have stuff to say, and then I need to kind of articulate somehow. So, 60s were a time of like free love. The pill came into the culture, I think, in like early 60s, whatever. So like the conservative upbringing kind of just came to a halt because young people were just openly rebelling against their parents. And then Hollywood was changing as well, like culture was changing, as in like people didn't want to watch the Santal epics, people didn't want to watch the musicals, like so from like in the world of cinema there was this sort of shift coming in the late 60s with The Graduate, The Easy Rider, Bonnie and Clyde, and later on with like Rosemary's Baby, and then just, and this was the time, like between 1960s, called 1967 to 1969, there was this sort of shift towards things that young people liked. They wanted to see films like The Graduate. They wanted to see things like Bonnie and Clyde. They were violent. They were more immediate. They were talking to them as young people, and then in this, and the film kind of, and then I think in the film, Tarantino does that, as in he does it, I want to say purposefully, and that's the first time he's done this in this movie, because they're all about pop cultural references anyway, but this one isn't. As in, he sees like the Spawn Ranch, which is this old-timey movie set where they filmed all these westerns of the 50s. It's invaded by hippies. It's invaded by a pest. Right? He sees this sort of, and even Rick Dalton's like, fucking hippies everywhere, fucking just dirty hippies, they smell, whatever. So he's the old guard, and he sees this is the new thing coming. The free-loving hippies are coming, and they're taking over. They're like a disease. They're like a virus, right? Slowly taking over. And then they're taking over the world that they know, and they're just reappropriating it for themselves. Like, you know, like they dumpster dive. They just take it's just horrible. But so what then happened is, well, there's the whole story of how Charles Manson actually ended up going to the house that he did, because he wanted to be a rock star. He desperately wanted to be a rock star. He wrote a song that I think was on one of the Beach Boys album. He wasn't credited because they rewrote the music around it, but then it's his song. Charles Manson wrote a song for the Beach Boys, and then
it was Never Learn Not to Love.
Yes, right. So he did that, and I think he touches on this in the book as well, and it's in the podcast series as well, that he desperately wanted Terry Melcher to give him the time of day to actually introduce him to people. He wanted to, but then he was also too late, because he was like the folk musician, but then people already had Neil Young, people already had Bob Dylan, no one wanted anymore. So he was perpetually frustrated then he cultivated this sort of family of people. Like, he was also a misogynist and a racist to boot. Like, he's not a great guy either. But then, so out of spite, he wanted to take revenge on people who denied him stardom that he thought he deserved, that the world owed him. So by murdering Sharon Tate accidentally, because she just happened to live in the house that Terry Melcher used to rent, he killed the princess of old Hollywood. So which makes the whole story basically a fairy tale, as in like, well, a dark fairy tale where this big dragon, big ogre comes in, and he kills the last remaining hope of the old world connecting with the new, because she was married to the young hotshot director who was bringing in the sort of the new vision into cinema. Polanski was this hotshot superstar guy. Like, you can't deny it. Like, I know people will be like, oh no, but 1975. Like, sit down. You know, in 1968 he was the guy. He was looked at the way Hitchcock was looked at in 1963. Like, it was you can't imagine how much of a rock star he was in 1968. And then Manson, by killing her in the absence of him, because he was in London, I think, either, I can't remember if he was already shooting Macbeth, or maybe he was back prepping for like the Day of the Dolphin or something like this, that he then later abandoned because, well, his wife died, so he took a break. But so she was the evolutionary link connecting the old cinema, because she was starring in these like screwball comedies that were basically just lifted from the 40s and 50s. She was this starlet trying to make a living as a star in the old age Hollywood, and he was re-engineering Hollywood to be something else, and they were the connecting evolutionary link, and he killed it. as a result. I mean, not Polanski, but Manson did. So I don't want to be hyperbolic, but you could draw a parallel, because after 1969, after that time, culture took a turn, and then everything got darker and grittier and more violent. So you then have like Straw Dogs, you have Clockwork Orange, you have Taxi Driver. Like the new Hollywood basically just became, was catalyzed by, partly by this shift. And then that makes an appearance in the film. It doesn't make an appearance in the book, which is interesting, because it's almost an afterthought in the book. It almost doesn't exist. It's because it's not about Sharon Tate. The film is about Sharon Tate. The book is about Rick Dalton.
Yeah,
realizing he has talent, even though he's a has-been, right? So, so Sharon Tate is an interesting one to me, because she's an icon of cinema, even though she didn't really have much of a life, because her life was taken away from her prematurely. But the fact she died, and the manner in which she died was almost, I don't want to say that this precipitated the change, but it was part of the shift towards something darker, because, well, I don't know if you guys know, but then, Manson tried to, the fact that he wrote pigs everywhere. This was supposed to start a race war, because they wanted the Black Panther to take the blame for this, the Black Panther movement. It's ridiculous. So it almost
Helter Skelter.
Helter Skelter was supposed to be a race war, when people would rise against, black people would rise against whites, and then whites against blacks, and then they would all kill each other, and then that would leave, and they all kill each other off, and that would leave Charlie Manson as the new Jesus. Like, this was how ridiculous he was.
It's a lot of drugs. It's what they do to a mind.
Well,
and calculated as well.
Than that. But yeah,
and calculated as well.
But it's so Sharon Tate as a historical figure is an interesting one, because on paper she didn't have much of an influence, because she didn't have much of a portfolio of work, but she's in the fairy tale of Hollywood, she's a sacrificial lamb that turns the world into a hell pit that has never since been saved.
Yeah, it's a tragic story. Like it's honestly something I've kind of always known. Like, I don't remember a specific point in time where I discovered it. It's one of those things that even pops up as a lot as references in various movies. So growing up, I knew of it. But I had a similar morbid period like you, Jakub, where I just lost myself in horrible, horrible stories of murder and suicides and whatnot when I was like 15 or 16, I believe. And this was one that shook me. It's a word that's being used a lot by people, being shook. This was legitimately shocking for me. I remember that I found like a website that went in detail of like what happened the night and everything. That images was just horrible. And that's the unfortunate thing. Like, she has always been tied with the murder. And the fact that even you were like, yeah, I've seen Fearless Vampire Killers, and then the other movies, Valley of the Dolls, and you have
Wrecking Crew,
and that's kind of it. Like,
and a few pilots, I think. Yeah,
it's just very minimal stuff that never broke into any type of mainstream. It was never like great movies per se. But she was rising. It was even, I don't know, like, to make a probably horrible comparison, like if someone like Florence Pugh stopped before she made Little Women, or even before she made Midsommar, it's kind of like, this rising star just kind of disappeared. That's kind of similar, probably. And even then, she had bigger projects and better projects than Sharon Tate did, unfortunately. But what I love about the movie, and to an extent even the book, it is that he shows her alive. And this was controversial in Cannes because she doesn't do anything. She has less lines than her male co-stars.
Oh, my goodness.
Rightfully, Tarantino said, I reject your hypothesis.
Because he didn't want to really explain to. I mean, maybe it's difficult to kind of come up with a nice quip on the spot, but then, like, on the Joe Rogan podcast, he basically like, she spends her whole, it's 2 days, and she spends these 2 days all by herself. Like, who is she supposed to talk to?
Yeah, that's all by herself, leaving.
Obviously, I think the issue is that people have projected what they want to happen on Sharon Tate. Well, what happens if she's alive? She'll probably just go around and do a bit of shopping, watch a film, and then prep for any other project. What do you expect her to do? Go to space? Like,
chill.
There has to be a level of realism. What can you feasibly do with someone like that? they are not going to go off in those 2 days and do something extraordinary. They're just hanging around because their husband is off in London and they're just waiting for them to come back. They've got parties to go to, they go to movies, they chat with the public, like that scene. And I think that's adapted well in the book, where she goes to the cinema to watch Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
I think that's a good scene in the book. And that's why I have no issue with the representation of Sharon Tate. It's not as if her being alive in a work of fiction is insulting. And I understand that it would be if it was what was Tarantino doing with her. It's nothing, and that's the point of it. She's just going about her life.
And it's generally incredible, I think, just the fact that in the movie you have the quick little, like, the fun Great Escape, what if Rick Dalton was in the Great Escape, which is cheeky and all that. But then when Sharon Tate goes to the movies to watch The Wrecking Crew, you're not seeing Margot Robbie in CGI in the movie. You are actually watching the movie. You're seeing Sharon Tate.
Yes.
And she's there on the screen. She's alive. There's people in the audience who are laughing. There's people. I remember I watched it in the cinema twice. People laughed at the same times as the other audience did in the movie. It was delightful. I think it's the first time that 95% of the audience members actually saw Sharon Tate acting.
For the first time.
For the first time, yes. I don't think anyone had before, because again, they're smaller movies and really hard to find as well.
Wrecking Crew, come on.
Beyond Valley of the Dolls is my favorite movie, says no one.
No, but there are people on Twitter who's like, well, what about Valley of the Dolls? Like, oh, come on, like, you have seen Valley of the Dolls probably in 2020 because you have probably just found out that Sharon Tate did something else than just die.
Yes. People have probably seen beyond Valley of the Dolls more than Valley of the Dolls, only because Roger Ebert wrote the screenplay.
But then,
yes.
See here, there's in the film, but in that very scene you talk about, and I watched this again last night because I couldn't stop myself.
I watched it 2 days ago. I can always watch this movie.
It's an amazing scene in the film, in the book as well. But it's an amazing scene when you see this woman's sort of glee when she just they're laughing, like, as in, like, what I'm doing is working. As in the book you get details of, like, when she falls on her ass, and then you're like, you keep the champagne bottle up so you don't get like glass in your face, and so you get this sort of behind the sort of curtain detail.
And then she was very insecure as well about taking the role.
And
all that.
Yeah, but in the film, all you see is her reacting not to the film, but reacting to how people react. So, which is she's connecting her character to the audience, and she sees that what she does for a living makes people respond, makes people happy. With this scene validates her as a working performer, as an artist.
Yes.
And then what people took from this scene was her dirty feet. Like, that's all this was. Oh my goodness! Oh, the feet, everyone just like, Jesus, come on. 20% of people have a foot fetish. You're probably one of them anyway, because you noticed.
That's a horrifying statistic. That strikes fear into the heart.
1 person in 5 could have a foot fetish.
One in five straight men.
True, actually, yeah.
Slightly less apparently slightly less amongst gay men. So, just saying.
1 in 5 people need to be stopped.
No, but then that's just one. Like, you see this scene, and then you don't take the story because you're just distracted by her feet. And I'm like, I think grow up.
The thing about it as well is, I think the culture that surrounds Quentin Tarantino's discourse is, haha, he likes feet. That is essentially the discourse around it. And if you see a scene like that, or you see the scene in Death Proof, or you see the scene in From Dusk Till Dawn,
in Pulp Fiction, in Kill Bill,
Eightful Eight and Django are safe.
Well, safe.
You say that, but then.
From the foot fetish.
The issue then is that the discourse is not about what that scene means, like in Once Upon a Time from Hollywood. That's a very strong scene. Mm-hmm. The focus then is, haha, it's feet. Tarantino likes feet. And then the cycle continues.
Yeah.
Really, the detail of feet is strange, granted, but it's irrelevant to really what the core of the scene is about.
What's strange is how has she managed to have her feet this dirty when she was wearing boots?
What's stranger is she's taking her shoes off at the cinema. That's just a faux pas, isn't it? You don't do that. You don't
She's
put
not
your
wearing
feet up.
socks.
The 60s.
She has boots.
I
and
don't
she's not
care
wearing
if it's
socks.
the 1960s or the
wearing
2160s. You don't
boots.
take your shoes off in any cinema in my country.
High boots, leather boots, no socks. Do you know? She took these boots off, and I'm happy for the entirety of the audience to actually stay awake.
No, she was far away from everyone, so no one was close enough.
No, but then what's important about Sharon Tate, at least in the film, because in the book, like the ending of the film is an afterthought somewhere in the first quarter of the film. It's like, oh, that one day when this guy showed up and he said he was there to do the devil's business, and I just punched him in the noggin, and then oh no, that was in the little subchapter in the backstory of the dog, right?
Yes.
Which is great, by the way.
It's a bold choice.
But that's pretty much what this novelization's for, right? Because you just see the dog, and it's just like you're meant to kind of just project certain things because the dog's of a certain breed, so it's muscular, and it's probably dangerous, and then it does its business. And then in the book, you kind of find out, oh, the dog is an actual killer as well.
It adds detail to the film, which is where I'm rather skeptical on someone diving into the book first. I don't think that's...
Yes.
It's possible, but you're not going to get much out of it. If you haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I doubt you're going to enjoy the novelization.
No one should read the book before watching the film.
Precisely.
The book is an added layer of detail and appreciation to a film that you like. And if I would say, if you watch the film and you didn't like the film, skip the book. Like you're not gonna fall in love with the film all of a sudden as well.
And I think it's rather telling that, I mean, this is one of the rare occasions where it is the other way around. Usually you read the book and think, well, that was quite good, I might like the film.
Well, but that's novelization, right? That's a different
Precisely,
story.
that's novelization. This is not, it's the other word for it. What's it called?
Adaptation?
Adaptation, there we go.
It's in the title of the podcast.
Sorry, but I've had a few cocktails and a few vodka cokes. I can't remember every little specific detail. But my point is, the only other one I can think of, and I've not read it, but it's Back to the Future, was adapted into a novel.
Well, there's a few. There's Back to the Future, there was Batman.
Oh, I've read the Star Wars one, I've read the Dawn of the Dead one.
Oh, the Star Wars ones were insane. It's Star Wars and The Simpsons I used to read a lot as a kid. And it wasn't because I was invested in either universe, either Star Wars or The Simpsons. But it was just something to read. It was a little extra of something I somewhat enjoyed, you know?
You want to live in the universe more.
You do, and I think that's the redeeming quality of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. For people that do like the movie, and there's a lot of people out there that do, it's a very good companion piece to think, I really enjoyed that. I didn't quite get my fill after 3 hours. I'd quite like a book.
Yeah.
And I do think it serves its purpose well. It's fun, but it's for me, it was kind of forgettable. I can't pick out one scene where it's like, what an incredible scene that really shaped the narrative as to what I think of a character. I'll give you one
in a second.
Oh, we'll get to it in the end, actually.
No, but then there's one thing in the film is structured around a few things, but it has a progressing narrative, right? As in there's two narratives, three, because there's Rick Dalton's journey as a cowboy, there's Cliff Booth, who just kind of happens to wander into the Charles Manson murders, and there's the actual Charles Manson murders, right? Event. And then in the film, they do spend, like, the entire last act is based, you feel like this whole thing is building up to the Tate murders, right? Because just details being filled out. Oh, Charlie's gonna dig you, and then realize, oh, that's Charles Manson. He's in here. He's interacting with the characters that I'm following. He's just in the background, and now these people are kind of merging more and more, and then it goes into the sort of final recounting of the evening, which is minute by minute, and say, well, these people parked up in their car. She fucked off. They forgot the knife. They came into the house, and then it's a wrong house because, Rick Dalton's fucking drunk, and he just told them to fuck off with their big noisy car. So they decided, let's kill the cowboy star. Let's kill the people who taught us how to kill, because all we saw was violence on TV. So they changed their mind, and they fail because the TV's killing them, right? But then that's the twist, because when you watch this film, and halfway through, anybody who even vaguely knows who Sharon Tate was would be realizing, oh, this is what we're building up to. We're building up this massive climax when this woman's gonna die, and he's gonna revel in this sort of in this violence, and in this horrible orgy of violence that this whole thing was, because it was absolutely just horrifyingly bloody and vicious. And then you just know what to expect, because it's just an element of culture. You know what happened. You know this woman's pregnant. You know what they did to her. You know what they did to her friends, and you're expecting this to happen, and he subverts his expectation at the very end, and he serves you a cocktail of violence just targeted at the perpetrators. And then even at that, I'd say, like, audiences like, oh, he hates women because he gets this woman. Like, no, he hits this woman against the wall like 7 times. No, it's not a violence against women. It's a violence against someone who in the real life killed Sharon Tate by stabbing her 47 different times.
Well,
Yeah, the
so
subversion.
I'm watching this and I feel righteous revenge, like, fucking yes,
yeah.
you killed that motherfucker. Yeah, because you just feel like, yes, this princess lives, at least in this film, in this fairy tale, the princess lives, and I'm happy for it. But the book doesn't have it. The book is a companion piece, doesn't have this sort of momentum, doesn't have this build up. It ends on a different note.
Well, that was actually originally Tarantino's intention. For him, the movie was supposed to be first act, second act, third act, and an epilogue, which would be the night of the murder. But while he was editing the movie, he was like, this shit is too long. And after the Spawn Ranch, there's no turning back. So he just cut everything with like a massive machete. And he's like, third act is actually the murder, and that's it.
Well, he
like
has this montage with the Italy sort of thing, which is also symmetrical, because that you see Rick Dalton has the hair like Roman Polanski has in the beginning.
Coming back
from
the airport.
It's all symmetrical. His wife is Sharon Tate. He's Polanski, and they're in the house. And they fight back, right? But then the book ends on a different note, because now this is the best decision he did for the film, to remove all this nonsense, because it works in a book, because the book now becomes like a meditation a lot, because there's a whole scene with his stepfather in there, Kurt Zastupil. That's his stepfather, right? He was the pianist, and then he talks about himself, like, yeah, well, my kid Quentin would love the autograph. He pays homage, he connects his world to your world, to our world, and it says, like, this, we're all part of the same, like, part of the same game of trying to kind of just score jobs, and hopefully someone will like it. And then it just makes this dream kind of like, I don't know, it's touching. Like, I read the ending of the book and I was touched by how delicate it was. It was it was almost, and especially how it ends on the lines with the girl. It's just amazing. It wouldn't work in a film in 1,000 years. No one would have made it work that way. But he basically just embraced the fact that he's working in a novel, and he just worked very well into it. So I'm happy.
Yeah, in the movie, it would have killed the pacing of everything, just having this elongated dialogue scene, which is unfortunate, because I would love to watch those scenes, like with little Julia Butters acting her ass off with Leonardo DiCaprio. And that's, again, like you said, Jakub, the movie is ultimately about Sharon Tate and those murders and everything. Meanwhile, the novel is about just Hollywood and the changing of times and acting and the beauty of making movies. Again, it's a luxury. That's where it's all building up to, the luxury and the beauty of making dreams, of making magic real for people, to give them something, to almost a reason to live for. And it's poignant, and it's not something I was expecting. I kept expecting, like, with each passing chapter towards the end, I was like, are we actually going to read about the murders, or we're just going to accept what was written like 10, 15 chapters ago? And that's it. Yeah, you accepted it, because it's not about that.
Well, it ends in February as well, right?
Yeah.
It ends at a party. So basically, just the remainder of the film is not in the book, right? It's only in an afterthought. So it's, I don't know. I know the book has its flaws, and he kind of writes the way he writes. He writes in his own voice, and when he recounts the Bruce Lee, I can't imagine anything else but Quentin telling me this specifically. Like I was sitting with him in here, and he was trying to tell me how cool this is.
Do you two like the portrayal of Bruce Lee in the
but then
book and film?
But it works. The way the book comes to a close is just it's poignant and actually tells you that, oh yeah, this book is not about the Sharon Tate murders, even though Sharon Tate is a prominent character in there. It gives you hope because you know what happens in the film, that you're still allowed to live in the fantasy, but it also reminds you that it's about Rick Dalton's embracing that he needs to change if he is ever to have a life as an actor, and then because an 8-year-old girl teaches him how to act and be serious, because he has to ditch the pompadour, he has to look like a Hell's Angel, he has to go and work in Italy even though he hates Italians for some reason. It was like, how many have you seen? I don't know, fucking enough, like Jesus.
And Westerns fucking suck.
Yeah, Sergio who? I'm like, it's good that he has a friend in Cliff Booth who actually actually watches the films. And he likes most of them too.
And I suppose that's the beauty of it, though, is that we learn those details through those early moments. And like Nicolò said, those are the off-putting moments that are really going to steer who likes and dislikes this. If you've got an entire chapter detailing the likes and dislikes of Cliff Booth's films, then you're going to definitely turn people away. But it is worth it for that detail later on when it comes into play with that Sergio Capucci joke and with the later moments of Rick Dalton as an actor. He's past his time. He's had his bit, and by the sounds of it, one of the reasons for that is that he is not invested in the films around him. He does not watch these things. He's not aware of what is relevant at the time, and an 8-year-old girl has to tell him what it is.
Well, that's the sort of what I said. Like, Hollywood of the time was not aware of what the young kids like, what the audiences want. They were like, we know how to make westerns, we make westerns, and then it turns out that if you want to make westerns, go to Italy, show and see how Sergio Leone makes westerns, and then all of a sudden, like, this is how you make good westerns because the heroes are not white and villains are black, or everything's in shades of gray. And if you want to show a villain, you get Henry Fonda to shoot a kid in the face in the first 5 minutes of Once Upon a Time in the West, just to establish that he's a bad guy, right? He's coming into a realization all of a sudden that, okay, well, that this is how times will change, and he has to change with them. He has to embrace the method acting. He has to embrace taking this seriously. It's not just a job that he can rehearse the lines and fall into a drunken stupor and then wake up and covered in his own vomit and go to the set. Like, he has to actually put some work in, right?
Yeah.
So would you guys say that, because this is a point of contention for some people, but who's the protagonist of the story?
I think it's Cliff Booth, mainly because we get a lot of detail for him. I think it's a toss-up between Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton, but I think Cliff Booth for me is sort of the guy that dominates the piece with the most integral moments. I think when I think back to my time reading it, it's sort of the big events for me are Rick Dalton. Yes, he had that scene with the 8-year-old girl. I remember more the impact of it rather than the dialogue itself, where with Cliff Booth, you've got his role as an enforcer and a stuntman. You've got the revelation about his wife, which I don't think was necessary, but I appreciate that he's tried to do something with it rather than just allude to it. I think the strength of Tarantino's work here is that it doesn't feel like he's cleaning up loose ends, but because there weren't many loose ends in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and if there were loose ends, they were rather small. He just wants to go back here and add detail to where he felt he didn't have time. Because like you both mentioned, he cut a lot from that film. He cut Tim Roth out of that film completely.
He did.
Which is
Butler.
It's a travesty. But at the same time, it is great that he has the opportunity to actually go back and do something like that. Because, I mean, if you think about directors who were given the second chance to put detail in, it never usually works, like Zack Snyder's Justice League. There are times where it is necessary. But even this is not something that you need to read to understand Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the film. This is here if you want more details about Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton. And I think, like Jakub said, Sharon Tate is very much the focus of the film. Here, she is more of a...
She's a presence.
Yes, she's a presence. Like, I mean, even Manson a bit is a presence. We get more of the whole, he wants to be like his hero Bob Dylan than
there's the scene where he goes through the house to the house of what's his face, the landlord, right?
Yes.
In the book, there's a whole scene where he talks to him,
which is also present in the the very few deleted scenes that he actually added in the Blu-ray.
But it's
Some of the
interesting
very
that
few
he cut them out, right? It's very, because it actually refocuses. So to answer your question, I think the film's about Cliff Booth. Because you can see he's clearly the hero. He kills the baddies, even though the lady walks screaming into a swimming pool, and then Rick Dalton comes at her with a flamethrower. It's just a nice touch, but she's for all intents and purposes already disposed of, right?
It's not going to last long.
Cliff Booth saves the day. He saves the cheerleader and saves the world, right? And then he even gets, I think, stabbed and shot or whatever, and then he's in the ambulance. He gets waved goodbye. He's like the hero. He's going back into the ambulance, right? The book ends on a scene with Rick Dalton rehearsing lines over the phone, and then realizing then that they, that they're having he's having a great chemistry as a working actor with an 8-year-old girl, and then the book ends with what? And the next day on the 20th Century Fox backlot, on the set of Lancer, the two actors knocked them dead. Not Cliff Booth, the two actors. The book's about Rick Dalton. The film is about Cliff Booth. In my opinion, like we can disagree on this.
Yeah, Tarantino disagrees on that. I think Mark Maron podcast was talking about it's Rick Dalton.
There's more detail on Cliff Booth because he clearly is an interesting character, but I think the biggest arc in the book is Rick Dalton's.
Yes. Even in the film, in a certain sense, like how he changes and grows. He kind of plays in the whole like dichotomy of the actor and the stuntman, because in the end, it's always the actor who gets the credit, and the stuntman is the one who does all the dirty work for the things. He's the one actually, like you said, gets stabbed during a fight and does all of the fighting, basically, in the end. He's the one who's going around doing Rick Dalton's business. But yeah, I like to see this as like it's about both of them, not just about one or the other. But if I probably had to pick, I probably would go with Rick Dalton, because it does, even in the film, it does end with him entering the house of Sharon Tate and probably going on to have another wonderful career, just making great movies. Maybe, who knows?
Well, he's the old world. Now entering the world of the new, because he's invited to the party in Roman Polanski's house.
He's one pool party away from starring in a Roman Polanski movie.
Exactly. Rick fucking Dalton.
That's the thing about Rick Dalton, though, is that I think the comparison majorly for me between Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton is Cliff Booth has moments, whereas Rick Dalton has an arc. Cliff Booth he's got the dog, he's got the stunt story, he's got the Bruce Lee story.
Mm-hmm.
Rick Dalton is about a man that is coming to terms with his inability to adapt to a new layer of Hollywood. And I think that's done well in both the film and the book.
At the risk of sounding provocative, I would maybe say, would you guys agree that maybe in the fact that Cliff Booth is getting more character wrinkles in the book and then more attention in the book, maybe partially, I don't want to accuse him of being reactionary, but maybe could it be inspired by the fact that he thinks he needs to explain himself because of the backlash he got over the film, how Cliff Booth is just being misunderstood by audiences because it's like, oh, he's a misogynist, therefore Tarantino is a misogynist. Look at what he's doing to this woman. Well, so now you give him a backstory that, just these offhanded scenes where he hands Aldo Ray a bottle, or when he shoots two mafiosos in the face in a restaurant.
It's brutal.
Which is brutal, but the scene's great. It's very well written as well. But, so it's I kind of feel like on some level this could be it, as in like he has so many moments because he feels like he needs to explain himself, otherwise people will just still accuse him of something, but then he probably's already realized that people will accuse him of whatever just because it's cool to accuse him of stuff.
I wonder how much of the book he had already written before starting the screenplay, because I think the structure was there. He probably changed small things. I don't know. It's never been particularly, from what I read and heard, he hasn't really talked much about his creative process with this, like how much writing he got done before starting the screenplay. Because if he says that the script as well was supposed to be with the epilogue, and then he changed it in the editing to the third act, I think he had already planned all of those things out, and probably thought, okay, we don't really need to see those things for Cliff. In a film, it works better this way. I don't know.
Do you think he's an architect or he's a pantser?
Probably architect.
Do you think
I
he
don't know.
like plots everything out in advance?
Probably just to make it work. I don't think he's one of those guys who generally goes into the editing booth not knowing what to do, but he's
No,
open to changing
as a
his
writer,
as
do
a
you think?
writer. I think so. I think because there's a clear sense of progression through the novel,
Yeah,
the way
and
it's made.
especially considering this is a novelization, there is already that structure there where he
Yeah.
can pick and choose what he wishes to grab from the film, but at the same time he knows where he can add extra details, which I think really lends itself to what he wants to do with this, which is essentially add more detail to a project he's worked on. And he does that. He takes all the important scenes that he would like to discuss from the film and he discusses them. I think his intentions are successful. I just think the way in which he writes it is not as powerful or as engaged as the film. It's still a fun read, and I keep using that word fun. It is a fun read,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a fun film as well. But with the film, I feel more inclined to engage with these characters. I feel more inclined to sort of think what they're thinking and know what their intentions are. With the book, I feel like there's something stopping me from completely throwing myself at it and saying, I love this book. It's fantastic. I think it's a good book. I think it's fine.
Do you
I
think
don't know
maybe
what it is.
something maybe related also to, because that's how I was thinking about a couple scenes, is that in the movie there's a more well, the point of view is always focused on Sharon Tate, Cliff Booth, and Rick Dalton. And in a novel, it changes perspective a lot. And there's some scenes, the one that surprised me the most reading the novel version was the Spawn Ranch sequence. Because in the film, it's all pretty much all from Cliff Booth's perspective. Meanwhile, in the novel, it's from Squeaky's point of view, who's inside the house and, oh, he's coming towards us. And, oh, there he is at the door. And there is just leaving. Like, there's no tire that's been flattened. There's no hearing the dialogue between him and the various girls. It's an interesting choice. And I think that's also what helps in differentiating the novel, making it feel less like a novelization and more like its own thing, its own creature, because it's giving you something you've already had, but different in a way that's fresh. Because what you have the movie. If you want Cliff Booth is a badass at Spawn Ranch and you want attention, you have the movie. But in the book, I like that we get to know Squeaky in multiple scenes in the novel, which was interesting. It gives more depth, like we talked about, to various characters who were a bit not forgotten, but just kind of very secondary on the sideline in the film.
Well, the flat tire thing being missing, I think it shifts focus away from building the fact that he's a badass. You don't really need this in the book. You already know he killed like 60 Italians a day in Sicily or something like that, right? Whatever the number was. And then when he was in the Philippines, like the Japanese soldiers were kind of afraid of him because he was just decapitating them like left, right, and center, right? When he wasn't, yeah. So you don't really need this reaffirmation that he means business, right?
Mm-hmm.
What this scene gives you in the book is the focus on the fact that he goes and visits who he thinks is his old friend, and he doesn't recognize him. And it's like, okay, that means, yeah, well, like these connections count for shit in here. Like it's just like we all grow older, and like this guy's blind, and he's probably just happy to have sex with this young woman who just, well, for all intents and purposes, just taking care and abusing him in the same sentence, right?
But she loves him.
Well, so she says. but it is kind of just in the film, at least partially delivered from their perspective, because you see it, like when they go into the ranch, the perspective shifts to the house as they're watching television, and then there are these scenes from the house, and then kind of just focus shifts to Cliff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not entirely. And then like you don't get the scene when Squeaky makes Bruce Dern or George Span breakfast, right? Like she makes him eggs, and then she berates him because he's just you can't do this properly because he's blind or whatever. So it's yeah.
Weirdly enough, for being something that kind of wants to demystify and take power away from the Manson family, at least the film, I like how the novel humanizes these girls a bit, or it makes you understand why they could get manipulated rather easily by Manson and his appeal, which is something that, like you mentioned, The Haunting of Sharon Tate, Ewan. I don't know if you've seen, probably have, the film Charlie Says, from Mary Harron, the director of American Psycho, which came out in 2018. And barely anyone watched this for good reasons, because
Are you saying this is an Uncut Gems
shit.
episode? Just saying.
No, it's a dog shit episode.
We
because
gotta
it's
get
not
through
good.
Postal first, everyone. Let's hold our
True.
horses here.
True.
Let me
But
give
I-
you
Watch the
this.
masterclass.
I actually saw this movie back in Venice. They had a premiere of it. It was like on the sideline, and I watched it. It has Matt Smith as Charles Manson. And this should
Of
tell you
all
everything.
people.
With a horrible wig. And one of the things about that film that I would personally would say, that's like, if people found Once Upon a Time in Hollywood offensive and whatnot, watch Charlie Says. I think the way it treats the Manson girls, it's all about them after the murders and how they're reliving the memories of what happened, and Charles Manson and blah, 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 and everything. You get to see what happened. And that movie actually shows the murders, for instance. And
Really?
it's,
Oh.
yes. Like when it's focused on the girl when she's stabbing Sharon Tate. It's like, no, it shows other murders as well. It's like, no, we don't need this. We don't need this. And the shocking thing, like you mentioned, the way Tarantino kills off the characters, it's in the movie, they're horrible, they're ridiculous, he makes fun of them. Again, it takes power away from them. That's what I like, because it's always been about the fear of the Manson family. Oh God, what's going to happen? It's another Manson murder situation, another Manson family. And they're just ridiculed by Cliff Booth. Like, nah, it was a name dumber than that. And I was like, Rex, Tex, whatever.
He just laughs in his face because he's high as fuck as well.
Oh man, like I always talk about catharsis on this podcast. That scene is immense catharsis. Like, it gives me chills just from from how much joy I get, which might sound deranged, but I don't care.
But
Meanwhile,
in the cinema, when she gets a can of dog food shoved, just thrown in her face,
breaks her nose.
like people ridicule this because it's just violence for sake of violence. No, this was catharsis, because I was fearing the worst. It's like, oh my God, this is how Cliff Booth is gonna end. No, the Manson family doesn't make it out alive from here.
And you laugh. You don't expect it to be like that.
But you laugh with affirmation.
Shock.
Like, it's kind of like, yeah, you show them, Cliff.
Yeah. And the problem with the freaking Charlie Says is that it spends the entire movie humanizing these women and making them understand that they are, I mean, spoilers for the movie, but no one cares. And that they are like, they committed the murders and accept that you fucked up. And the final scene is a massive middle finger to these women, where it shows again a scene earlier where like a biker was like, "Hey girl, come with me away from Manson." And she's like, "Nah, I'm gonna stay here." And it shows the scene again, only with the girl actually leaving Manson, and basically saying, "You always had choice. It's ultimately it's your fault that you committed all these murders," which is questionable, very, very questionable. And I think Tarantino's not having that's like humanizing these girls a little bit more in the novel, as well as avoiding that in the film, works much better.
I'd say, if I may quickly, you should probably listen to the You Must Remember This series on the Charles Manson murders, because she goes in there into exquisite details on the psychology of what's happened. And then he was basically running a cult, right? So he was holding massive power over these women, especially that most of them were underage as well. And in the book, Tarantino gets into this by proxy, as in he doesn't get to it specifically, because I think he knows this is not his place to make light of this. But he makes these comments when I think Cliff Booth is in, like, I can't remember where, when he just talks about like briefly becoming a pimp, and then someone tells him like what being a pimp is like.
But he was in France.
Yeah, but but if you read or listen to how Charlie Manson ran his quote unquote family, that's pretty much what it was. You know, it was like holding this massive power over these people, and then the Charlie says, you say, oh, that's pretty much what they, he was Jesus to them. And then mostly, I mean, a good part of this was the sexual power he held over them. Like he was using them as in like he would be like going to, like, if you wanted to go into a, I don't know, a recording session to just impress someone, he would take one of these 15-year-old girls and pawn them off to someone so that they would have sex with some big shot producer to give him privileges that he wanted. And then they were doing this in exchange for sexual favors he would give them as well. So he was essentially like to dumb it down, not necessarily. I don't want to dumb it down. I don't want to boil this down to just sex. But this was part of this. Like he was a pimp with a weirdly warped psychology / philosophy on, and that was also kind of just targeting very vulnerable young women. So in the book he doesn't get into it. In the film he does to a little extent, but I think he's just leaving it out because this just opens a whole different discussion, I think. Because Charlie Manson in there is kind of like, it would give him more power, and I think it's best. I think he's best sort of neutered that way because he's just a fuck up. He's just a guy who doesn't even know where Terry Bradshaw lives. That's what he is, and he just lives in these stories. Oh, Charlie will dig you. Well, you never meet him, like, because probably if Cliff Booth met him, he would probably break his nose.
And thankfully, never meets him. Like, I know some people were hoping that maybe Charles Manson would come in the final scene and get killed. That would have made it a proper cartoon. Like, you wish.
Yeah. Well, you wish, but then I'm satisfied with the film, how it ends. I'm satisfied. And with the book, how it ends, I'm satisfied. And I'm satisfied with how little attention he pays to Tex Watson, and he's an afterthought.
He's barely mentioned in the novel, right?
Yeah, he's an afterthought in a chapter about a dog. And the dog's as a badass.
Brandy dog. And this, we can start wrapping up. I would love to know, you guys, what are, for both the film and the novel, which things might differ actually, but what are your favorite characters and what are your favorite scenes or scene per novel and film?
One of my favorite scenes in particular is more because of what it shows about Tarantino's writing rather than it being my favorite scene. And it is that last scene. It's that last line. It brings us that simplicity that Tarantino writes with, because he's here to give detail to a story he already portrayed. He wants to do it simply. He knows what he wants to say, and he's not going to use like fluffy descriptive language. He's going to be straight shot, straight, plain and cut, like Ernest Hemingway would. And it's such a simple, direct approach, and I do appreciate that on the whole. And I think it lends itself well to the likes of Cliff Booth, where you've got those little fragments of story. Those little, he was a stuntman, he was the enforcer, here's a few examples of it. Here's where it kicked off, here's where he is now. It's such a simple pattern, but it's an effective one because we learn more about the character, it's interesting information, and it's detail that we didn't need, but it is nice to have it. Which is why I think Cliff Booth's, he certainly has the most interesting moments, but I wouldn't say thematically or in the sense that he's not the most depthful character. He just has the sort of the liveliest scenes. He has the Bruce Lee scene, he has the killing his wife scene, which is explained. He has those moments of where there wasn't much detail in the film. He has it all here, which does detract from the fact that Rick Dalton's arc in the book is quite strong. It's the man realizing he can't act the way he does now because it just wouldn't fit with the times. So I do think the flashback to Cliff Booth with his wife on the boat, and I think Dalton at the end practicing his lines with the girl, I think those are the two strongest scenes in the book because they highlight how well Tarantino can write, but it also highlights that this is detail that he finds interesting. It doesn't matter if we find it interesting, this is what he wants to write, and he has the power to do so, which is, as well as being excellent to have, it is also dangerous. It is something that needs to be guided very carefully, and I think he does get the gist of that. I think he does guide it more or less to where it should be, and he gets from this story what he really wants to get, which is more detail for his latest project, which is fine. That's no qualms about that. In the film, I like Brad Pitt's portrayal of Cliff Booth. However, where I don't quite get the gist of it is sort of his relation to the Manson family and those that were following him at the time. I think that's better explained in the book, where it adds those little lingering details. So for the film, I would say probably Dalton, and that's more due to the scenes. Again, it's the same scene as the book, where he's rehearsing his lines, he's getting advice from a child who is essentially the future of Hollywood. It's a very telling scene, not because of how it's written there, but because of how DiCaprio portrays it. He portrays it with an empathy that wouldn't really settle in with the typecast macho men of the 1960s. He portrays it with, this is a man on his sort of last legs trying to make a big difference for his career, and he's taking advice from an 8-year-old child.
For me, I'd say in the film, Cliff Booth is my favorite character, especially this because it's mysterious. Like you don't know shit about him. Like it's just like he does parkour for some reason. Like he jumps like an absolute athlete onto roof. And you don't know why. I mean, the book kind of gives you like, okay, well that's how, because he's a Navy SEAL or something like this. But you get these details, and I mean, well, you get a character is just. Like we on the Gems podcast, we've recently been talking about charisma all the time. He's a charismatic character. Like I look at him, I want to be out, and I want to be around him. I want to spend time with this guy. He's just a presence that I want to be around. He's just great. And it's in the book, my favorite character is probably, it would be Dalton, but a little part of me wants to say that Trudy, as in Mirabella, will be the runner-up. She's much better written in the book than she is in the film, or maybe it's part of it's partly in the performance, because there's also this, like, kids are kids. But I'd say Rick Dalton is an amazing character, especially how he's written and how much of an arc he has when he goes from, I don't know, rejecting the idea of being the Steve McQueen that Italians can get, to embracing that he can be old Shatterhand and whatever. So he's a great character and very well written. So in terms of scenes, I would say my favorite scene in the film, so many to choose from, because I like quite a lot in there. I mean, as you may have already guessed, like Tarantino, I just love this guy. But the scene that gets me every time is the scene when they film the episode of Lancer, and then I mean, it's a whole sequence when he forgets his lines, and then and they break the illusion, then they re-immerse in the illusion. It's amazing. And then he goes into his trail and just like throws his hat, and there's this montage of going like or just like embarrass yourself in front of these goddamn people. It's just such a great scene. It's not in the film, it's in the book, but it's just amazing. It's just, I love this. And in the book, the absolute best scene, well, apart from the fact how they read the lines over the phone, is the scene in the bar when he talks about how how he dispels the myth of how he almost got the role in the Great Escape, and how this kind of interplays with his own stepfather. It's just such a touching scene. I love this. Yeah,
there's picking a favorite character, it's hard. And it's like Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton, they're the go-to characters. So to go a little different direction, like in the movie, for me, Marvin Schwartz, like Al Pacino in this, it's one of those characters. It's just in
all the killing.
oh, I love that stuff. All the killing, just
the killing.
it's what is it, like 6 minutes of screen time, 7 minutes of screen time, and this owns them. Honestly, I would say that almost every actor owns their scenes. Even the Manson girls, they're all played by like daughters of Hollywood royalty, and they're not good actors, but in the context of the film, it works. But yeah, Al Pacino just slays me. I love the opening of the film every single time. It just puts me in the mood instantly. It's probably my favorite character in that. But even in the book, the way he's expanded, the way he's just direct with Dalton, just telling him, yep, you just got to do this. There's no other choice. Otherwise, you're not going to have a career after this. Meanwhile, in the book, I like how Jim Stacy, the lead of Lancer, is expanded upon. A person who actually turned out to be pretty bad in real life as well, but we're not going to talk about that. In the context of the book, is lovely.
What, really?
Yes. He was like in a motorcycle accident, and I think he lost his legs, and he became a pedophile. So it's rough. If you want to read up on that, you can do. There's a big rabbit hole on the internet. Look for
Was
Jim
the reason
Stacy.
for him becoming a paedophile the motorbike crash?
Or
was
you
that
made it sound like he lost his legs and you were like, that's
and
it.
then he became a pedophile.
It came afterwards, yes, the accusations and all that. So, but it doesn't matter in the book. I like how we get to spend more time with him. It kind of made me wish there was more of him in the film, because I love Timothy Olyphant. But even then, what we get of him is more than enough. But like you mentioned, Jakub, just the entire back and forth at the bar at the end, and he's there as well. It was very fun. In terms of scenes, like film, again, so many to choose from. But another one that slays me every time, it's the FBI scene when they're watching it on TV. And it's just kind of, again, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the film is a hangout movie. And that's literally the part where you're just hanging out with the characters. You could cut it, nothing would really change, but it's just so much fun. It's almost like Mystery Science Theater. You could watch like 2 hours of these guys just talking over this episode of FBI. And meanwhile, in the book, you mentioned it briefly, Jakub, but the Aldo Ray scene, when Cliff Booth is there at the hotel, they're filming the movie, and Aldo Ray's in his room, just sad and old and alone, and he spends some time with him. And they see that almost as like who Rick Dalton will become, could become, probably won't become by the choices that he's made, because they talk about like him being actually bipolar, I think, right? And he wasn't diagnosed at the time because it didn't exist. They talk about the alcoholism that he was suffering from. And it's one of those scenes that could have easily been played more for laugh in the book, but it's very tender, it's very human, it's very tragic. Like that's the end of the old Hollywood. Like that's literally seeing classic actors just die and be forgotten by time. And it's bittersweet, and it comes near the end of the novel, which makes it even more powerful. So those are easily my favorite scenes. And ultimately, like finally, the big question: do you think that the book is better than the film, or vice versa? What is your ultimate verdict? Are they on the same level? One is better than the other? Jakub, why don't you go first?
In this, I think in many cases you could probably I could give you a straight answer. I can't in this case. I think these two exist together, and then I think you can disregard the book and just have the film, but you can't have the book and not have the film, which probably makes you think that the film is more complete. But yeah, I'd say the book's power isn't that it makes the film much richer. It gives depth to the characters that they may have not have gotten the depth that they deserved, and then it gives Tarantino time to spread his wings and just tell you about all what he loves, which is cinema and westerns and stuff. So I'd say okay. If I gun to the head, I would say probably film reigns supreme just because it stands alone. As in, I can take the film off the shelf and watch it, and if I just took the book off the shelf and I have not seen the film, I'll be like, I have no idea what this is all about. This is weird. And then there's Sharon Tate. Something happens. Nothing happens to her. I don't get it. But then when you watch the film, you're like, oh, I get it. Why? I get why he's making the choices in the book that he makes. But then you can't have this. Yeah, you need the context of the film to do it, which means the film is kind of superior.
Yeah, and weirdly enough, I just had I think the benefit of the book is that at least it goes more in depth on Charles Manson, and you have more context, which is something that a lot of people didn't have going into the film. I remember I watched it with some it was actually the first night in uni in the UK, and I went out with my flatmates to kind of socialize and we watched the movie, and none of them knew about Charles Manson and Sharon Tate, so they took it all as fiction. So I think that's probably the biggest strength of the book, is that
So-
at least it gives more context.
So did they think that, oh, this Marilyn Manson guy, what a strange name he has?
They didn't. No, they literally didn't get it. They were like, "Yeah, but what was all that about? Why do we care about this woman?" I was like, "Oh no, I'm crying." But just yeah, Ewan, why don't you tell us?
I think I do prefer the film to the book, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. I think one, it's because it's the first Tarantino film I saw in the cinema, and that's just always going to have a soft spot for me. I can see Jakub's eyes there. He forgets how young I am. I'm a little cherub. I was 19 when Once Upon a Time in Hollywood came
So
out.
it's the first movie you were allowed to see in the
It's the
cinema.
first movie I was allowed to see.
Because they're all hard 18s in here.
Yeah, they really don't let up on it is 18. There's a lot of blood. That's it. But beyond it being my first experience, it was a very good experience. I took my dad to see it, and he fell asleep halfway through. And then when I asked him what he thought, he said it was very good, son, very good. So, yeah, I think because I'm so used to having Tarantino work as a visual creator, I think it's not just easier for me, but it's better for me to see what he wishes to say, to see the narrator bring those characters to life, to hear the soundtrack, the record scratch moments where Mrs. Robinson plays as the characters start to interject. And I think what really serves well with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in both instances is that Tarantino makes happenstance work. Rick Dalton just happens to live next to one of the big flames of the 1960s and its turn into the 1970s. He just happens to live next to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. It's not something he does depend on it, but it's not something that needs to feel drawn out or elongated. It's just a very matter of fact. These are just neighbors. That was regular in Hollywood at the time. People lived next to famous people, and he doesn't make a big deal of it. It just happens to be such a core mechanic of his story in both instances. Where I think the film does better than the book, though, is that it has that edge to it where it doesn't have the self-indulgence that the book has. Now, while the film does have a bit of self-indulgence, it is capped off with phenomenal performances and iconography of the 1960s that projects itself well. Everything that Tarantino writes about in the book is more or less captured in the film. He just feels he's left a few details out and has written a book. And the book is fine. I enjoyed the book. But like Jakub said, I couldn't just jump into the book because you need the history of the film. You need to do your research and watch the film before you read the book. And I think in rare exceptions, you could say, okay, well, the book might have its own merits, but the book is very much connected and dependent on the film. Nothing wrong with that. It's just you can have the film without the book. You can't have the book without the film.
Yeah, I share all of your sentiments. I do think they complement each other in interesting ways, which makes me curious to see if we'll ever get that famous extended 4-hour cut.
That's coming out in a couple of years, apparently, along with a Bounty Law TV show and a follow-up book to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Ooh, interesting. Well,
great. Have I heard that before? The Star Trek in this film is also in the works, right?
It is. It'll happen. He's going to do it.
He promised a TV version of Django back in 2013. That's never come out as well.
I'm telling you, do you know what he's going to do? A remake of The Lady in Red.
With Michael Madsen.
Hinted at in the book.
Single-handedly revive Michael Madsen's career.
Like digitally de-aging.
He might do a Vega Brothers movie after all.
No, he's not going to do it. No,
he's going to do it. They're going to both be geriatric.
He's going to do a Vega Brothers, or he's probably going to do a play with these things. He's going to. I think he's going to revisit his stuff in theater. He mentioned this.
He said he wanted to do that. I think out of all of them, Reservoir Dogs is the clear cut because it's more or less one room. Straight away.
Hateful Eight,
Hateful Eight. Oh,
Imagine being in the room when they actually made the theater play of Hateful Eight. Well, not the theater play, but just like the reading of the original script, the table read. Yeah. When they made it in a theater, just I wish they recorded that, but it makes it more special that it's impossible to get it. But yeah, I do believe the film version of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is superior because of everything you guys said as well. It's just a film. It's just as deep. Like you're not reading the music, you're actually listening to it. You're seeing the editing, the everything, and even the ending. One is more, well, honestly, like I want to say the book ending is more poignant than the one in the film, but I'm lying on that point. Like every time, I've also seen like 5 times, twice in the theater, and every single time it makes me emotional at the end. It's kind of like seeing Sharon Tate come out of the shadows with like this big belly, and she's alive, and everything's going nice and happy, and they're going to live happily ever after in this fictional fantasy of Hollywood. And just the title comes up. That I remember. That's when it hit me. It was like, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's not looking back at the past. This is the fairy tale. You mentioned it as well, Jakub. This is the fairy tale.
Well, it has a Hollywood ending. Like the camera goes on the crane upwards. All you need is basically just a nice sort of string music, and it's like the 50s sort of film.
And I don't remember the name of the track that plays at the end, but that's from a movie. It wasn't originally scored for this one, but I think that's the definition of like a melancholic song. It just fills you with this warm sadness, which is like gives me chills literally every time. And there actually, yes, I had to I went on a long rant with my college flatmates because I had to explain them everything and why I was crying in the cinema after this, because it just gets to me. And this was actually, like, speaking of Tarantino films, this was my third one in the cinema. First one was Django, but that's because they're way more lenient here in Italy with ratings. So, yeah.
Kill Bill represent. Sorry.
I used to go to the cinema every week. I got ID'd for the Will Ferrell comedy Downhill. I was 20.
Jesus.
And that film was at 12.
Oh.
So either I look incredibly young, or it's mandatory that they check every ID for everyone wanting to see that nonsense remake of Force Majeure.
I got carded for buying wine when I was 33.
I don't get carded for alcohol. Apparently, I look 26.
And,
no, I've always been carded in the UK. Never here in Italy. They don't care. That's in the UK constantly.
By the way, Nick, when you had to explain, it's like, oh, because I cried and I had to explain. Did one of your friends behave like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2? Why do you cry? Is there something wrong with your eyes?
They didn't get it. They're like, yeah, it's an ending, it's fun.
Why do you cry? The woman's dead, and she isn't. You don't get it.
Yeah, that's oof. Which some people can see as a negative of the movie, honestly, but personally, I think it's fine. It's interesting that for people who don't know, even if they're bored throughout most of the movie, because I could tell, there was like 4 of us, I can tell that at least half of them were bored. The ending gave them that adrenaline rush that made everything make sense. It's just kind of like a sad state of affairs. Like, you need the blood to make a movie good, and if you put it at the end, they're going to think it was great, even though they were yawning throughout the majority of like Spawn Ranch and the Rick Dalton acting. So that's a shame. But I'm thankful that we have, honestly, this movie. I'm thankful that we have the novel. I wish Tarantino keeps on writing, keeps on making more stuff, and I kind of hope he strays away from the beaten path. Just do something you haven't done before. He wants to do horror. Either do horror as your final movie, or do novels, do horror books. I would love to read that shit. Make me an Exorcist haunted house gothic horror filled with swear words. I don't know. Do something, Quentin.
He should remake The Haunted Mansion with Eddie Murphy.
I'll be honest with you.
With Eddie Murphy.
With Eddie Murphy.
If he ever made a horror, as a film or as a book, I see it more closely as like a giallo.
Yeah, that's fair. But that guy Wright is already doing that. It would be like copying Edgar Wright.
And by the way, when I rewatched this yesterday, I tweeted. No one gave a shit about how I tweeted. This movie is so damn perfect, and anyone who disagrees is a hippie snowflake who wouldn't recognize greatness, even if it tossed a can of dog food in their face. So that's my final statement.
Bless this movie and bless Tarantino, honestly.
So, yeah, it's all right. It's all right. Just
like I always see, haters gonna hate, and you see Tarantino going like this.
It's kind of like, I don't care. I make millions of dollars. So this brings us to a close with the first episode of Death by Adaptation, and let's give a round of conclosure to everyone. A round of applause, people. We did it. We survived, and you survived as well, listening. But let's close things off. Tell us where we can find you. Ewan, go first.
I was about to say England there. You can
Wouldn't
find
be
me.
entirely incorrect.
You can. Oh, hang on. You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at Ewan Gleadow. You can also find my writing on Clapper Cult following Northern Lights and The Geek Show.
Jakub?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Talk About Film. You can find me also on Letterboxd as Jakub Flasz. You can find my stuff on Clapper at www.clapperltd.co.uk, and you can find my stuff also on flashonfilm.com, and you can also find me in England.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at NikiGra97. You can watch my short films, my videos on YouTube and Vimeo at Enjoy the Movies. And of course, you can read all of our stuff on clapperltd.co.uk, features, reviews of books as well. We're starting now. The good old Ewan has already put up the review for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And there's going to be 2 book reviews a month starting August. So very, very soon. And yes, stay tuned for more episodes of That's By Adaptation once every month at the end of the month. And also be sure to check out the other 2 Clapper podcasts. You have Clappercast, where we discuss the latest movie releases coming out in the theaters and on VOD and streaming. And then Uncut Gems, where we're talking about movies that no one wants to talk about, but we sure enjoy talking about them. Everything from The Village to Death Proof. If you want another Tarantino dose, just go into that one. It was a blast to record. And that's it. So thank you very much for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon. Bye-bye.